Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to talking with you about your book, Never Split the Difference, negotiating as if your life depended on it. And, you know a little bit about that. You were FBI's top international hostage negotiator. So talk about a high pressure job. But I think it's a really fascinating book, and I appreciate you sitting down with me today to talk about negotiation.
The pleasure is mine.
All right. Kind of to start us off, and one of the things, like when I was reading the book, one of the things that I guess kind of surprised me, and I am not, a great negotiator, so I will be honest about that right up front. But you talked about the concept of getting to yes. I think it was kind of like that was kind of a foundational, this idea of getting to yes is kind of foundational for a lot of negotiations or how people are taught. And you write about how there's this evolution of negotiation and moving away from getting to yes. And can you tell us a little bit about that, particularly like the idea of focusing on the act of discovery and creating empathy between negotiation parties?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I mean, and really, I think the intent of getting TS in the beginning was very good. There's nothing wrong with the intent, and what the intent really was is getting to agreement. And so, what are the essentials of a great agreement? First of all, that the other side feels committed. And this whole getting to yes thing, the problem with that is it spawned yes momentum and momentum selling and momentum agreements, and they became traps. And so getting to yes in an application became about trapping people. I mean, I've seen the yes momentum described as get a series of micro agreements. Each one is a tie down, each one is a commitment. And then you got them. They got to say yes to the big commitment. It's a trap. And I know. I mean, I was lucky enough to meet Roger Fisher some years before he died, and that wasn't the intent, but that was the way it began to get implied. And so then, how do we get out of that? What really matters? What really becomes an agreement? Empathy precedes agreements. And empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is just understanding the other side. Because if you don't understand where the other side's coming from, your agreement's not going to hold up. It's just not. And then the process of discovery. The getting TS people will go heavily into preparation, learning as much as possible. And the problem with preparation and learning as much as possible about the person on the other side of the table. First issue is most of the data sources are like dating profiles. Like, that ain't the person you're going to meet. Like, that picture is just not you. That was you 20 pounds ago, 20 years ago. That is not the person I'm looking at. And I've had people describe, LinkedIn and all those things. Those are dating profiles. That's not actually who you're going to see. Then, all right, let's say, what about what information is accurate? How long is it going to take you to do the research? Like, I can get a minimal amount of information about you. Next to nothing, actually, and then discover a lot about you in a conversation. And I could take this for granted based on how I approach my negotiation training. Like, my training from the beginning was there's no safety net, there's no bat net, and you get used to walking a tightrope, and there was never a safety net there. You realize, like, all right, well, the safety net doesn't actually affect my ability to negotiate. That's all an illusion in my head. So if I don't need it, then I don't panic when I don't have it. And my Harvard, and the academics, and it's not just the Harvard that think this best alternative to negotiated agreement is key issue. I mean, that's a psychological construct. And then, how much information do I need in advance? I got trained to get on the phone with somebody I know nothing about. Nothing. And develop the information in a way that instead of making them feel interrogated, makes them feel good telling me this stuff. And which accelerates everything. So really, it's just vastly different than the getting DS framework. It's quicker. Time is money. It establishes relationships faster. The only thing besides time that might be money, relationships are money. A friend of mine, Joe Polish, runs the Genius Network. Great guy. Says relationships are money. Or is information money? The third type. Well, this negotiation approach picks up the information faster than anything else does.
Mm-hmm.
So you get time, money, and information all sort of rolled into this great bundle of emotional intelligence-based approach of the Black Swan method,
Mm-hmm.
and never split the difference.
Yeah, and I love, you talk about the getting to yes too. The problem with yes is that you get these kind of phony yeses that people know you're kind of pressuring them, so they give you a yes that ultimately they probably have no intent of really bringing into effect. It's just a way to get you off their case. But, or you say later in the book, a yes without a how is kind of worthless.
Yes,
And
without a how is nothing.
yeah, yeah. So, unpacking the yes and no dichotomy a little bit, honestly, you blew my mind with this concept you write that no starts the negotiation. And that no, the word no, has a way of removing barriers and creating beneficial communication. And it seems counterintuitive, but then it's like you do a beautiful job of explaining why that is. Can you share with us your fascination with the word no, and how we need to retain our way or retrain our way of thinking about it?
The real fascination with it, really, the first turning point in my yes-no journey, and in everybody's yes-no journey, is coming to grips with what yes and no really is. And I came across this book in 2002 called Start With No by a guy named Jim Camp. And I remember just doing a double take. I think my head probably almost snapped off my shoulders as I'm walking through the airport. And I see on the bookshelf, Start With No. And I'm like, Start With No? Like, are you kidding me? I thought that's what we were avoiding. And Camp threw out this whole idea that just let the other side say it's okay, let them know it's okay to say no. Like you can say, look, you can say no to me at any time. You just go away. Mm-hmm. Camp called that preserving their right to veto, their right to say no, and said that if you try to take away somebody's right to say no, you take away their autonomy. Mm-hmm. And if you take away their autonomy, people will die to preserve their autonomy. And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, boy, no kidding. I know that's true. That's the whole reason why we got hostage negotiators in the first place, because people were dying right and left because we try to force them into agreement. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, this is an underlying concept in business negotiation, not just hostage. Mm-hmm. So we decided to take it one step further and say, what happens if you actually trigger no? What happens? Why people feel safe when they say no? Mm-hmm. Like my FBI days on a New York City Joint Terrorist Task Force with the NYPD. Mm-hmm. I remember there was a lieutenant there that used to say, Chris, a lieutenant's job is to say no. And first that really, I was kind of insulted by that, because a leader's job is not to obstruct his people. You're talking about being an obstructionist. Your job is to be an obstructionist. But what made him think that was cool? Because he felt safe, secure, and protected when he said no. Mm-hmm. I was like, what happens to a counterpart when you make them feel safe, secure, and protected? Suddenly they're open to listening. Mm-hmm. So let's start triggering no on purpose and get some experiential data, which is another way of saying find out, learning by doing. What happens when you get people to say no? And it's so powerful that a lot of people, that's the only thing they learn, and they immediately make more deals. And they immediately stop getting ghosted, and they immediately start getting decisions. And I'm really happy for them. Mm-hmm. I feel also bad for them because they're making more money, but they just scratch the surface. And switching from yes to no makes such a huge difference in sales and negotiations and in deal making. Mm-hmm. That people can't imagine they need anything else, and they're just scratching the surface. But it's that much of a difference to switch from yes to no.
Well, and it's like you said, it creates an environment where a relationship can flourish, right? So it's like, I respect you enough that I'm giving you control, or I'm respecting or acknowledging your control in this part of the conversation, so that you can say no and it doesn't just shut things down, or
exactly.
I'm bludgeon you to get my yes through your no or any of that. And then, like you say, and in the book, it's that process of discovery and learning more and more, and being able to really kind of fully flesh out the context of the discussion. And I love too, so much of like what you say about working with your counterpart to get them to solve your problems, right? And the how questions and the what questions. But let me ask you a what question. What are some of the more or most common mistakes that people make during negotiations?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones first is going first, not hearing the other side out. Most of the seasoned and savvy negotiators say he or she who names price first loses. Well, that's going first. You're leaving money on the table. The problem with going first with price is you either leave money on the table, or you drive money away, or you drive people away from the deal. Either or.
Mm-hmm.
So going first, having your say first. People are dying to have their say. So you get people talking at each other. So the biggest mistake is, however you do it, not hearing the other side out first is probably the biggest mistake.
And I think going back to the book, you make that point, that it's the person who's in control of the negotiation is the listener, not
Listeners
the
in
talker.
charge, yeah.
Yeah. Now, and that, I guess maybe that leads me to this next question. What are some of the hardest things for people to master when learning to effectively negotiate?
Actually listening. And then clarification is really hard to master because people are so afraid, if I go back over this, if I try to clarify in any way, I'm going to look stupid, or I'm going to look like I wasn't listening,
Mm-hmm.
or or that I can't comprehend. And I see on a regular basis a lack of clarification. Be sure that what you heard is what they meant to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. I'm talking to a really successful businessman in a Salt Lake Park City area just a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Ridiculously successful guy, great human being. I mean, the dude's name is Randy Garn, and Randy is a great example of people who can be massively successful and by being very generous, like one of the most generous guys I've ever met. And he's talking about how he and some of his senior executives, they'll watch negotiations among people that work for them. And he said they'll see deals getting destroyed by miscommunication, or two sides getting further and further apart by what he termed miscommunication. And I said, all right, so is it a lack of articulation? Does communication break down based on a lack of articulation, mm-hmm. or a lack of listening? He's like, yeah, people are not listening. Mm-hmm. They're not hearing what the other side is trying to say. They're not listening. And that's really the issue. Don't become more eloquent. Mm-hmm. Don't put your efforts into saying the same thing different ways. Put your efforts into being a better listener. Number one, mm-hmm. you'll be on more firm ground. Mm-hmm. Number two, the other side will love it. Mm-hmm. Like, people love to be listened to. So you're on more firm ground, mm-hmm. and they like you even more. So they're more likely to be collaborative. Mm-hmm. I mean, what more do you want?
Yeah. Now, and I think that ties to that concept of mirroring that you write about. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mirroring is not the body language mirror. It's not the tonality mirror. Mm-hmm. It's not the mirroring their behavior. Mm-hmm. It's the repetition of 1 to 3 words, 1 to 3-ish words. When we're coaching this, we say it could be as few as 1. It shouldn't be more than 5, mm-hmm. 3-ish words. What they just said, usually the last thing they said, and that's just to get good at mirrors. Like they are the great clarification tool. I talked about clarification a moment ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, start mirroring somebody. They're going to repeat, rephrase, add depth, add scope to what they just said. All massive amounts of information being triggered in your direction. So mirroring is a great skill, particularly for clarification, because by and large, if you said something that I become aware that I need clarified, mm-hmm. and I might say the typical, what did you mean by that? Mm-hmm. Most likely, you're going to repeat it exactly the same way you just said it, only louder, like an American overseas. But what I need is for you to say it differently. Mm-hmm. Expand on it, add to it. And mirrors always get people to say things in a more expansive way.
Mhm. Well, and I think the listening thing is brilliant because, and I know this is one of my great temptations is trying not to jump ahead to like what I want to say next. Right. And it's like, if you're not listening to people, using that what you were saying earlier, you're leaving stuff on the table because you're not pulling in the information, or you're not evaluating the information they're giving you because you're too focused on, well, what do I want to say next? Now, we talked a little bit earlier. I mentioned earlier about the what and how questions.
Yeah.
And can you talk about the methodology behind that, and explain also, as part of that, why do we avoid using why questions?
Yeah. You caught yourself too, right? Why avoid why?
Yeah.
So what and how?
Mhm.
When we first wrote the book, and we pulled these from a variety of sources, like in hostage negotiation, they called them open-ended questions.
Mhm.
And it comes by a variety of other names: who, what, when, where, why, and how, that reporters' questions.
Mhm.
But what and how are the most deferential and pull the most information. People love to be asked what to do. People love to be asked how to do something.
Mhm.
There's great power in deference. And by definition, what and how start from a very deferential place, which means the other side is likely to give you a lot of information.
Mhm.
Now, since the book has come out, there's been a lot of stuff that we've raised our understanding of, increased refinement, increased understanding. What questions are designed primarily to uncover obstacles, to get people to think about obstacles?
Mhm.
The famous Jim Camp question was, what's the biggest challenge you face? That's about identification of obstacles. What's stopping you from moving forward? What are the next steps? That's about obstacles. How is then discovering how to overcome the obstacles, how to implement through the obstacles. How's about implementation? Yes is nothing without how. An agreement is nothing without implementation.
Mhm.
And we realize that there's a refinement, not exclusively, but primarily when you're looking for implementation, you're going to use a how question.
Mhm.
And the very beginning, it never split the difference. Starts with the famous, how am I supposed to do that?
Mhm.
Which was originally, as conceived and designed, the first way to say no. Like if I'm trying to get the idea differentially across to you that we're going to run into problems here and I probably can't do it,
Mhm.
I'm going to say, how am I supposed to do that? How am I
Mhm.
supposed to do that? How am I supposed to do that? Those are three different ways with three different meanings
Mhm.
of repeating the same how question. And I always thought of the first phase of no. Each one gets a little more firm till you get to the final phase, where you just say no.
Mhm.
Let no out a little at a time. How am I supposed to do that is the first phase of no. And then we're coming along with some more learning. We're coming up with another approach for preparation that's a little bit simpler and cleaner. We call it the 6-to-1 approach. And we ask 3 how questions. And I'm like, how am I supposed to do that is an implementation question.
Mhm.
You and I are in the middle of a deal. You want something that either I can't do at all, or that would be enormously difficult for me to do, which would take away all my incentive for doing the deal.
Mhm.
How am I supposed to do that is a request for help to get you to see something that's just a non-starter.
Mhm.
Brandon, my son, uncredited co-author of the book, used to always refer to how am I supposed to do that as forced empathy, making you take a look at my position and appreciate the scope and depth of what we're dealing with
Mhm.
from my view. So the how questions are largely implementation and incredibly effective at saying like, hey, oh, this is a problem.
Well, and I love too. It's not only the forced empathy, but you make the point in the book. It's also getting the other party to solve your problem, right? In the sense that it's like it's a subtle way to control the context of the discussion. So now and you make this point, about like you're getting the other party to spend their energy and resources to try to figure out your problems, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, if it's going to be a true collaboration,
Mhm.
they're going to have to expend their energy and resources
Yeah.
to collaborate.
Well, and it's also I think you point out there in several of the cases and the hostage cases that you dealt with, it was a way to pump the brakes. Like you get these crazy demands, we want $1 million or we're going to kill your aunt kind of thing. And, so then it was, well, how am I supposed to get that money? And it was a way to kind of, then the kidnappers had to go back and then they would decrease their demands and it bought time. And, it just was a very effective way to, I guess, kind of take the heat out of the situation so cooler heads could kind of prevail and ultimately an efficacious resolution could be had.
That's right.
Now, what do you think are some of the most powerful and effective tools that you found that successful negotiators employ?
The first one is patience, which can be very hard for some people. When I was coaching negotiations, hostage negotiations, I could never tell somebody to be patient. But if they were really chomping at the bit to move ahead, I'd say like, well, patience is a weapon. And they'd be like, oh, all right. And realizing that appeals to someone who either is very assertive or is trying to be very assertive. So, the patience, calm demeanor. Warren Buffett, by anybody's definition, anybody is going to have to admit that Warren Buffett's likely a very good negotiator. If he wasn't, somebody mentioned his name, we would know who he was. Like that dude's reputation is not for being impatient or loud or attacking. Like if anybody who's only barely aware of Buffett and you were to ask him, how patient do you figure Warren Buffett is? They'd probably say, oh yeah, guy's got to be patient as heck. Which then is, letting the deal come to you, having the ability to let the deal come to you, have the ability to let the awareness of the problems and the obstacles come to you so you're not caught off guard, so you know what you're getting into. I mean, patience is a great accelerator of great deals. So that would be another critical attribute. Plus, the more patient you are, the more likely you are to listen.
And then my last question for you, and this is, it's around the concept of the black swan. And in fact, your consultancy is named after Black Swan. You talk about the concept in the book. It's kind of like it's almost like this magical phenomenon that just happens in the life of a negotiation. That it's like, just really kind of opens things up. Can you explain the concept of the black swan and how they can be game changers in negotiations?
Yeah, but Black Swan was originally inspired by Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, The Black Swan, that I read back in 2007. And he called it the impact of the highly improbable. What are the little things that make all the difference in the world? And in point of fact, they're everywhere. Now, we could get into a very academic discussion over the concept of imperfect information. And in point of fact, no matter how smart you are, you've got imperfect information. No matter how good you are, you're holding, in every deal, you're holding something back. There's stuff you're keeping to yourself, close to the vest, cards you're not showing. Budget, timeline, pressures. Do you want to make the deal? Do you not want to make the deal? What are the issues that make the deal better or worse for you? The stuff you're holding back is important. Otherwise, you wouldn't hold it back. You feel the other side's going to gain leverage of you if you know it, and if it was known, it would change everything. Well, if you're holding stuff back, then so are they. So you get two sets of hidden information. Now, the hardest thing to wrap your mind around is what's in the overlap. If I don't know what you're hiding and you don't know what I'm hiding, then it's somehow, if we trusted each other enough to put our cards on the table, then the overlap of the combination of the two could be astronomical. And put it in poker terms. Maybe if we put our cards together, we got a royal flush and it's unbeatable. So the overlap is where the power is. Take an approach that simultaneously builds trust and gathers information so that if what you haven't managed to get them to tell you based on trust, they'll blurt out accidentally, and they're going to know stuff that's important that they have no idea is important.
Mm.
And you don't know to ask for it
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know what they're hiding. So you get into this phenomenal either upward or downward spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And the upward spiral starts with, there's really impactful, cool stuff here. They could tell me if I could just build a great relationship without making them feel exploited or interrogated.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, though, Chris, that part of that too is that you've got to have confidence in your own position to be vulnerable about a certain amount of information or whatnot. I mean, you got to be sober, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like, if you're going to, I think if I recall, I mean, you talk about some of the things like in the book, and what helped me through this, like if you're under like a time pressure, right? Like I have to have this deal done by Friday or else. And that the normal intuition is like, well, don't tell people you're under time pressure because they'll perceive it as a weakness and they'll try to exploit it. It's like, oh, he's under a crunch, so now we got him. But instead you flip it around. It's like, look, I have to have this done. And so, by Friday. And so then you're kind of franchising them to help you solve your problem again. But again, it's like it seems like there's this kind of wrapping your head around the idea of like being open with your vulnerabilities, maybe. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And wrapping your mind around that about the ways we take ourselves hostage is one of the key issues.
Mm-hmm.
Because, your vulnerabilities, that's you taking you hostage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm vulnerable here. Well, some people take those vulnerabilities and make them strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Like instead of saying, I got to get this deal done by Friday, being afraid to say that, say to somebody like, look, if we don't work this out by Friday, I got to walk. There's it's not a sin to not get the deal. It's a sin to take a long time to get a bad deal.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can push yourself forward, into that, a bad deal is going to cost me far more money long term
Mm-hmm.
than anything else. And that's a hard one. And I see people, and then recognizing the potential bad deals. There's a friend of mine, another friend. I mean, I'm sort of blown away at the people that I get to know as a result of the success of Never Split the Difference. I mean, having a best-selling business negotiation book in the world gives you a chance to meet some interesting people.
I bet it does.
And so Joe Polish runs an outfit called Genius Network out of Phoenix, Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
Phoenix, Scottsdale. It's a great group that I'm a member of, been very involved with for a number of years. I learned a lot about marketing, highly ethical people, very trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Joe says there's two kinds of counterparts in this world, two kinds of customers, two kinds of people. Half's an elf. What's a half? Hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. What's an elf? Elf is easy, lucrative, and fun. He says, work with the elves, avoid the halves. It's great advice, but how do you implement that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first thing I did on my team was I said, all right, there's behaviors that indicate halves.
Mm-hmm.
And if we start looking for them, there's probably about 5 different profiles. They're very predictable, and we're going to pick them up in the first half hour of the interaction. And so then I told my sales team, my business development team, you got my permission to walk away from the halves as soon as you spot them. Like we do not need to be dealing with people who are hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
So in implementing this process, picking out the behaviors, seeing how predictable it is, my team also started keeping track of the time costs of the halves.
Mm-hmm.
And they came back to me and they said, when we make a deal with a half, between negotiation, implementation of the deal, start to finish, it's 2 to 5 times the time cost, which means you just took a 50% cut in pay to deal with a pain in the neck. Now, then the next thing they looked at, the halves repeat. Because you might take a cut in pay if it turned into an annuity. a lifetime payment
Mm-hmm.
of repeat business. And they said, not only did we take a cut in pay, but the halves don't repeat.
Oh,
These end up being one-offs. They're such a pain in the neck to deal with that dealing with them just doesn't go well. They don't want to deal with us again either. So the hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, you took a 50% cut in pay and they don't repeat. So there's no reason to do business with them. And which then means that the elves start to show up as if by magic. Now, they were always there.
Yeah.
But you just got distracted by these morons that were hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. They're too demanding. They're unreliable. They don't pay on time. They ask for more free stuff. They screw you up in every way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that the halves suddenly, the elves appear out of magic. They were there all along. The halves just kept them from us. And so we put a lot into that on teasing out who's hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating early on. And we're like, there's somebody else out there that's better for you than we are.
Well, and I guess I'm assuming, I jump into a conclusion here. If you're not spending so much time on the halves, you actually have more time to like recognize the elves, and then if that process of working with them goes faster, the deal gets done sooner. So then you're able to move on to the next project or deal. So then it's like the volume picks up because you're not getting bogged down dealing, like all your attention is on this half project that, ends up not being lucrative anyway, so.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, Chris, thank you so much for, sitting down and talking about your book and about negotiation insights. I highly recommend the book to anybody listening. Really enjoyed it. And it's also, and we didn't even really talk about it, but it's like, it's rife with these like great real life stories, true crime stories of, hostage kidnapping and intrigues and just, it's unbelievable what you've done in your career, let alone the negotiation insights that you've picked up. So I just want to thank you so much for your time today.
That's very kind. And if I may, I'd like to throw out how people might be able to want to follow up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, when people are ready to take the next step, the simplest thing to do after buying the book is subscribe to our newsletter. It's free and it's concise and actionable. Now, to subscribe, all you got to do is go to the website, blackswanltd.com, BLACKSWANLTD.com. And as soon as you pull it up, you're going to get the opportunity to subscribe to the newsletter. And then it'll get emailed to you on Tuesday morning after you got Monday behind you. Tuesday morning, 7:30 in the morning, wherever you are. Concise, actionable newsletter. You can use the skills that day. Plus, the newsletter is a gateway to the website. I mean, it's the gateway. We've got a treasure trove of stuff to help people raise the level of their game, make more money. And in point of fact, this sort of collaborative negotiation is going to make you happier too. You're going to enjoy life more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thank you again. And I wish you the very best. And, thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me on.